We're talking about end-to-end testing today. We're going to explain what that is and how to do it. In terms of what we're going to go through, have some introductions, talk about what we do as a company, Bespoken, talk about testing and monitoring, and sort of provide an overview that covers in light depth some of the things we've covered in some of our other sessions, as well as what we do as a company. Then we're going to go in depth on end-to-end testing, and as well talk about our continuous testing, aka monitoring, which is something new actually that we've made available through our dashboard, which we think is really neat and we wanted to show off to you. And then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. Oh, and actually I should just, okay, it is sharing, right? Just double checking that I was sharing here. So introductions, I'm John Kelvey. I'm the CEO and founder of Bespoken. Also on this webinar, Bo Schrader, who's our head of marketing, and Yvonne Perez, who leads our customer success. They're in the chat window there, and they'll be happy to help you. What do we do? So we provide monitoring and testing tools for voice apps. We're a recognized vendor of Amazon and Google. We have over 900 apps that we're monitoring, and we have more than 2,000 developers using our tools. We have a long history also with speech recognition and AI, which is something I would sort of highlight. I have a lot of experience, and our company has a lot of experience scaling and testing speech recognition-based solutions, AI-based solutions, working through the technical considerations around making it work at scale, the functional and user experience considerations as well. And we've really tried to bring that knowledge to bear here in what we do for Bespoken and for voice apps. So with that, I'm going to go into the overview here. So one, we just created this, I think, pretty neat infographic that just kind of summarizes some highlights around voice apps and skills, and then also some of the key considerations for testing. And so I'll just touch on these pretty quickly. So there's a lot of skills out there, more than 30,000. Some of the people on this call, you guys, or on this webinar, you guys may have actually created them. There's some awesome ones. There's some other ones that are probably a little bit less distinguished, but it's definitely a growing field there. There's more than 47 million people alone in the U.S. with just a smart speaker, which is a lot. And if you look at estimates as high as like. And then in addition to that, there's not just smart speakers, but there's hundreds of voice-enabled devices now. So you have all sorts of different form factors that are out there. I mean, you have everything. I saw a jacket recently that you could ask it to get hot or cold. Cars are being enabled with Alexa and Google Assistant. Refrigerators. There's a smart bathroom. That's another one that is a little bit of a but lots of different devices, lots of ways to interact via voice, which we think is very cool. And then since we are talking about testing and monitoring, one thing we would sort of highlight is that it's very important to test, because if you catch a bug during the design phase, it's going to be 100 times less expensive than when it's actually in production or it's gone live. It's much cheaper to get your bugs earlier. It's also much faster to test early. So you're going to get things done in a higher quality way. You're going to get things done quicker. So those are two really good reasons to use it. And then this unique aspects of AI, I'm going to come back to that. But then over here on the right-hand side, we have this visualized as a layer cake. And these represent the different layers of testing. And at the top, we have manual testing, which is something I think almost everyone's familiar with. And that's sort of your first step. And then there's automated unit testing, and that's really about checking your code and your logic and making sure it's EchoSim or the Reverb app. Those are really helpful for just trying out your skill. Really easy to get started with. In addition, there's what I call here voice-free tools. And so these are things like our command line that allow you to interact with your skill just by typing. There's also the Alexa testing console, which is, we think that's really great as well. And there you can interact with your skill and see JSON payloads. It's a really neat way to do your manual testing. But we don't think you should stop there. We actually don't even think you should start there. The automated unit testing is also extremely helpful when you're getting started with a project. And if you're thinking about testing something manually, you could probably write a couple lines of code and do it with a unit test as well, and then it becomes something you can leverage over time. Unit testing is focused on testing your code, testing it and really minimizing the dependencies so that the tests do run consistently. You don't want to have to worry about the state of REST services or complex databases. It's better if you can mock those things out and really just focus on making sure that your code is working correctly. And if you know that the logic is right, and you have your test running, you can actually set up code coverage on it, which is really nice. That'll give you tools like codecov.io will give you a lot of insight into what's happening with your code, as well as show you over time how you're progressing and how the quality is improving or degrading, which would be a bad thing, but at least you'll know what's happening. So we think unit testing is a really, really important thing. We provide some really great stuff, we think, for this. If you're interested in this subject more, our previous webinar was on unit testing. So do check that out. And so sort of the other side of the coin from unit testing is end-to-end testing. And so end-to-end testing is really about testing your skill, but in the context of the entire ecosystem within which it sits. So when you're talking about end-to-end testing, you're actually going to interact with Alexa. You're going to have Alexa calling your skill. You're going to have your skill calling whatever pieces it requires on. It could be a REST service. It could be a complex database, like I was just mentioning. You're going to actually have those pieces working. You're going to see the response that comes back from the skill after it gets whatever it needs from those services. And that's going to, in turn, go back to Alexa, which in turn is going to go back to a device or to your client that called it. So you're working through that whole life cycle, that whole chain. And in doing that, one, that's an important counterpoint to the unit testing, which is testing things in isolation. You're testing everything. So that's great. We all know that things can go wrong outside of the code. But beyond that, you have a chance to also test some specific things that relate to AI, in particular, the speech recognition. And we're going to come back to that point on this slide, which is what are those things that we need to watch out for testing AI-based systems. And actually, I should just back up by saying, we think voice apps are so cool. We think Alexa skills are so cool. But one thing to keep in mind is they are a very different type of platform. And so it's a different platform um, in the sense that you have um, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but it's a different platform in that you are not running on the device, and it's a different platform in that it is actually relying on AI. So it's sort of like your first AI-based OS, which is a really neat thing. But it also creates new challenges, and one of those is that AI-based systems are constantly evolving. They're based upon machine learning, and those things, by their nature, mean that it is going to be changing from one day to the next. And so those changes, they can potentially be disruptive for your skill or your voice app. So you need to keep an eye on that. Additionally, languages and locales. Internationalization is a concern that's been with us for a long time, and it's really just a it's an essential part of software development. But with voice, I would say it's even more critical than it's ever been, because languages and speaking is the only entry point that you have to actually interact with it. So you need to make sure that you have great internationalization, that it's working well with people's different accents, within different locales, ensuring that that's all running correctly and that people are going to have a great user experience with it is really one of the biggest challenges that you have, especially if you're deploying a skill in several different regions and languages. Um, and then lastly, there's platform behavior. Um, right now, I think a lot of people are focused on Alexa. Within that group, there's a good number of people who are also doing Google Assistant. And then, and so working across those two platforms is a challenge. And then you have other players that are threatening to get involved. Facebook says they're going to do something. Siri has opened up, or Apple has opened up the Siri platform to some sort of slight extent. But there's rumors that they're going to allow for developers to get more involved there. And so as you get these different platforms, finding ways to ensure that your behavior is the same across them is really a great thing. And so with that sort of background, I want to show you what we're doing around end-to-end testing and helping to solve some of those problems. So this is a quick screenshot. All right, hold on. I'm just going to turn off my video here so that we don't have, hopefully it'll cut down on our bandwidth. All right, good. Sorry, hopefully you guys can hear me. So with the end-to-end testing, oh, sorry. This is an example of a project that we put together. This is for a skill called Bring. It's a pretty simple skill. So Bring is it's basically a grocery list manager. Uh, Hi guys, sorry about that. I guess my internet connection is not as good as I would like. I'm going to turn off my webcam. I'm going to go back into screen sharing here and probably repeat just a slight amount. But I was opening this project. This is the Bring skill. It's a grocery list app. Not anything too amazing, but it's nice because it's in different languages. And I'm just going to quickly show you or play for you how that works on the Reverb app here that I have on my phone. So open Bring.
Welcome to Bring. How can I help?
What's on my list?
You have the following items on your list: bananas, milk and orange juice. Anything else I can do for you?
Add chips to my list.
Okay, chips is on your list. Anything else?
Remove bananas.
Okay, I have removed bananas. How would you like to proceed?
Exit.
Exit is not on your list. What's next?
All right. Alexa, stop.
Talk to you soon. Happy shopping.
All right, so pretty simple skill. I think I just showed you the entirety of what it does. And now I want to show you how we would write end-to-end tests for this. So the first thing with the launch request, this is structured in our YAML scripting syntax. And so the left-hand side here for the launch request, this is what you're saying to Alexa, and then this is what you're expecting in a response. And this is end-to-end because it's going to actually take this text, it's going to turn it into audio, it's going to send that to Alexa, Alexa's going to send back a response, and then that response, which is actually audio as well, or at least parts of it are, that's going to be turned back into text. And so this is a really simple test. It's just one utterance and one aspect of what comes back that we're testing. So that one's a very easy one to get started with. Now, a slightly more complex example, here we're having a very short conversation with it. We say open Bring, and it gives its reply. And then we go ahead and say, what is on my list? And we're still in session. And at this point, we can actually create a transcript, or we can specify multiple different values for the transcript that comes back. And so this dash means that this is a list, and that if any of these items, any of these responses come back, the test is passed. And so this is meant to support what a lot of people consider as a best practice for voice, which is to vary the responses. So if people say add something to the list, you can say, okay, I added it, or thanks for adding it. You have a variety of different ways in which you might respond to the person so that they, it feels more conversational, it feels more human. And then you can also test the sort of complex aspects of the card. And so you have all that data available to you. And so you can check out that that's all correct. We also support testing the templates that come back for the show as well. And I'm just going to click over here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll enlarge the font there. People have to remind me to do that in every one of these webinars. So at some point I'll remember. But so you can really do deep testing against these responses. A couple other things I would highlight with this. We have this config element at the top. And so the config element, we have a locale. And so here we're actually testing on the UK version of it for Great Britain. And then you can select a voice ID. And the voice ID is what's used for the text to speech. So when we're talking to Alexa, we're going to take this text and we're going to run it using this voice ID, which is part of AWS Poly. And I'll just quickly show you. This and you can just take any of these names and then you can test with it. So if you want to test how your skill performs with an Indian accent, you can use DT. Or a Welsh accent, you can use Durant. Not quite sure how to say that. But so a whole variety of different voices that are available there. That can be helpful for trying out different scenarios. And so now that I've shown a little bit of this, I'm going to go ahead and run it. So we're going to we'll run this launch. I can either give the name of a file or a folder here. If I give the name of a folder, it's going to run all the files within it. In this case, I'm just going to run this one file because it does take a little bit. It runs about as fast as you can speak to an Alexa device. You know, there's some post-processing and pre-processing that we do, but also just interacting with Alexa and the round trip to the skill, that also takes some time. So when it starts running, we provide this debug output. This is really helpful. If something goes wrong in one of your tests, you can go in and look at it and, you know, really examine it and see exactly where the problem was. And then in addition here, yeah, so it already ran. So in this case, our first sequence, our first interaction, that ran all correctly. So that's nice. And then our second sequence, that failed. And it failed because there's no card set. Now, this is actually an intentional issue that we created. In this case, this skill doesn't actually return cards. We just inserted this test because we wanted you to, you know, see how that would look if you were wanted to test a card. But in this case, it's not available, so that turns up red. If we wanted this test to pass, we could just delete that part and then it would be working. So to show you some other examples, here's a case in which we're going through 3 turns in the conversation. We say open it, we say add, and then we say read. And as you can see, it's very easy to set up. Here's another example of checking values based on a list. So in this case, you know, when we say add cheese and wine, the skill may reply saying at the end, anything else, or how would you like to proceed? It's not actually functionally a meaningful distinction between those values. Either way, it's just asking you what you want to do next. But it's 2 different ways of phrasing that. And so either one we can check to see that it's actually showing up. Let's see. And so this is actually all configured for the UK. We also have this set up for German. So here we specify the locale as DE. We use a German voice, Hans. And then we've translated our different invocations as well as our responses to German. So very straightforward, but it's nice that we can test in both these different languages and locales. And another thing I would sort of highlight here, so we were just running this through, And if I go into alexa.amazon, and here I'm going to co.uk, or if you're doing this in the US, it would be alexa.amazon.com. We can actually go ahead and look at the history of utterances for our account. And so this is an account we set up in the UK, and we can see everything that's said, and we can see as well what the response is. And we can also listen to it, which is kind of fun. So I can go ahead and say remove cheese and wine here, or click on it.
Remove cheese and wine.
And this is the response that came back from the skill on that. And this is a really helpful tool as you're working with this. And it's actually just a helpful tool, period, for any sort of debugging that you're doing. But if you have any questions around how your test is performing, if it's not seeming to recognize an utterance correctly, if it's not matching it to the right slot value, or it's not even going to your skill because it doesn't seem to recognize your skill invocation name, you can go here and look at it, and you can see what Alexa actually thinks it heard for that device. And so that's a really, really helpful thing.
Open, bring and remove apples and oranges.
So we have that whole history there, which is really very helpful. I would also just mention we took this example project and we've actually put this out. We've put this out on GitHub here. And so the example project, it gives you an explanation on how to get started, how to run the tests. It links to our deeper documentation. We actually even included these tokens here. So these are how you actually, these correspond to the actual virtual device that you're interacting with. So you can check this out and just immediately play around with it and try out these scripts. We think that's a really neat thing. I will say this comes with the caveat that those tokens, it's the same for everyone. So think of that as if we're putting one Echo device, one physical Echo device out there for everyone to use. So if everyone goes off and uses it at the same time, you're not going to have the best result per this note. You really want to create your own token. We have some instructions on how to do that. But we just made those available, so if you downloaded it, you could just play around with it and kind of see how easy it is without spending too much time. But you're definitely going to want to get your own token to do anything serious with it. And just to show you guys the sort of documentation and capabilities that we have for it. So this is this actually walks through the whole syntax and structure for these test documents. Explains the configuration, explains what the sequences represent. One thing I'd sort of highlight is each blank line that basically represents end the previous conversation and start a new one. So those blank lines, that's how you know that one test is ending and the next one is starting. You can add comments. You can do a variety of different comparisons. I don't think I touched on this. You can do wildcards. So the speech recognition that happens when Alexa replies, that's not always perfect. So these wildcards, if it has a problem with some word or particular phrase within that your skill uses, you can use a wildcard to just kind of skip that. Basically test everything else. You can do the lists that I mentioned, and then you can do these object comparisons, which is just a card. I'm referring to it as an object here because it has multiple properties on it. And then running the tests, I showed you that. That's very easy. One thing I did not show you is actually how you install this. You need to have NPM, which probably a lot of you guys do have, But if you don't have NPM, you can just click here and see how to install that. That's basically just a global software and library management tool. And then to install our piece, it's just taking this and you say Virtual Device SDK -G. Started. We try to put out this nice sample project. We have these docs here, and in addition to that, it's very easy to get in touch with us. Yvonne here. Yeah, Yvonne put our emails here at the bottom, so you can reach either of us directly, either Yvonne or myself if you have questions about it. We're also on lots of different channels like Gitter and Slack and so forth, and you can reach us there if you have questions. So we do try to make it very easy to get started, and then we're also happy to discuss any things that come up with you guys. So now I'll just show you an example of running this in German. So again, it takes a little bit of time to get started there. And meanwhile, so while that runs, I'll just touch upon, we do make available a programmatic API. You can really do a lot with the scripting slash YAML syntax, but this programmatic API, if you do run into roadblocks with that, it gives you sort of full flexibility to do anything that you might want to do. And so this is actually also, sorry, it's right here. So this is part of our Guess the Price project. This is a pretty simple example, but the interaction is that you send it a message. This is basically the left-hand side of the test. And then you get back this result object that has the transcript, it has the card, it has any other data that comes back from Alexa, and you can write whatever tests you want against that. And so where might you want to use this that, that the YAML syntax would not work? Well, let's say you had a complex slot that you wanted to test and you had a lot of values that you wanted to run through it. Rather than repeating over and over the test in the YAML syntax, you could actually just grab that list of slot values you want to test for out of a file, push them through here by programmatically calling message, and then confirming the result. So you could just kind of construct a for loop there that would run through a whole bunch of slot values and ensure that a complex slot is working well, not just initially, but also you want to watch out for over time as you add new slot values that the old ones are still being recognized properly. So we do make this available. This is also it's documented here within the GitHub project, the Virtual Device SDK. It's an easy API to work with. Again, basically you just give us a token and then you're calling message. Not very hard at all. And let's see if okay, so our German test ran. And you can see it's the same result. Everything's green for the first one, and then something happened on the second one. I'm not skilled enough at German to know what it didn't understand there, but it looks like the transcript was a little bit different. We'd want to take a look at that and figure out whether or not that's a valid issue, and add it to our potential responses, or if something went wrong with the skill. And so those are the key things I wanted to show you about our end-to-end testing. Before I go further, any questions on those things that I just went through? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again here. Oh, it doesn't seem to be letting me do that. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I guess trying to share my screen there caused a problem. Hopefully you can hear me again. Okay, wonderful. So went through the end-to-end testing features and the scripting. I hope that's really helpful. Now I wanted to show you a new feature that we added, which is our validation monitoring, aka our continuous testing, which we think is really, really cool, and we really encourage you to check out. And so first of all, this is our Bespoken dashboard. This is a really great piece of software that we make available. We encourage you to just check it out in general. But in particular, we added this validation piece, which with this input and expected output, this works a lot like the YAML scripts. So you're putting in here what to say to Alexa, and here you're testing what the reply is. I'll run this so you can see how it works. Okay, and so here the test passed. We can see what the values are that it returned. In this case, it's actually testing a stream URL, so we can actually interact with the audio player. If you are using the audio player, we can see what stream it actually returned. And this functionality, this is similar to what we're showing you with those test scripts, which are pretty cool. But then the really neat thing that we added here is just with the click of a button, you can turn on monitoring for this. And so when you enable monitoring there, it's actually going to run this script on a 30-minute interval. It's going to notify you if there's any issues. If there are issues, it'll notify you again when it starts working. And if you integrate this with our logging capability, you're not just going to be able to know when there is an issue. We're going to be able to show you a lot of information about what's happening with the skill, so you can actually diagnose those errors and hopefully find a fix quickly. So it's a really great capability. It's very easy to use. There's, if you have a skill, you want to make sure it's working correctly. Our sort of idea is, why would you not use this? It's a very helpful tool. And that's what we wanted to cover for this webinar. With that, I will just throw it open to questions. Oh, actually, first, like I said, this will be available, but we'll provide all this info as well. So you can see links to everything that we were showing today. So any questions? I'll just hang out here for